Extend a warm welcome to all of you in the inaugural Cypress Conf, and I hope that you're sharing in the excitement that I'm feeling about being here today. I've been using Cypress for I've been using it since 2018, so whatever that math is, what is that, 5 years, 6 years now? And I started using it after using Protractor for about 5 years. So this is my primary end-to-end testing tool, as well as integration, component testing, and ever since that switch, I haven't looked back yet. With that, I'll get started. That's my introduction. Let's go ahead and share my screen. All right. So a few months ago, when the Cypress team opened up the call for papers, I had a long list of topics that I wanted to discuss. Some like strong types and Cypress environment, if you're using TypeScript, Cypress architecture, component testing, your component and Angular environments, just to name a few. However, as the final day to submit proposals approached, literally just a couple of days before the deadline, Brian Mann, who just talked about an hour or so ago about the Cypress roadmap, delivered a virtual talk on test replay, and I instantly became enamored with this feature. I knew immediately that this was what I wanted to present on. I even wrote an article on the release with the same title, Be Kind, Rewind. And a side note, if you are a fan of Michael Gondry films, you'll appreciate that I went with this title instead of Green Hornet or Flight of the Conchords just for my presentation. So anyway, I finally thought I might be taking a chance, like, hey, I'm going to do test replay. It's the newest feature. I didn't think I was going to get picked, but here I am. So let's kick things off by discussing what I've been notably highlighting in several webinars and podcasts as my favorite Cypress feature. And that's going to be Cypress Cloud. I know it's a bit of an unfair answer. Cypress Cloud's paid feature at Cypress, and it's not necessarily a feature. It's a byproduct of the Cypress product. But when you got hit with it early on, some of the biggest selling points were like, hey, you can see your test definitions in the cloud. It's not a very strong selling point, but what if you can see historical run data for every test? It's interesting. I can buy that. What if you can access the test recordings and screenshots of all of your CI runs in one place? I'm listening now. And what if we can parallelize and orchestrate all of your test runs for you? Sold. When I presented these points to my previous employer, I hit heavily on those last 2 points. And honestly, I believe that no amount of money would be too much money to be able to run hundreds, if not thousands, of tests during the PR process. I want to emphasize that last point. Testing locally is great for small teams and projects, but being able to constantly test new code being added to your main branch is an extraordinarily powerful tool, and that can't be stressed enough. Before Cypress Cloud came around, it was unimaginable to think of a run suite of integration or to run a suite of integration tests during the PR step. The recording and screenshot capturing were just icing on the cake. Not only could I run 200 plus integration tests in around 10 minutes, but now being able to quickly access my screenshots and recordings, I could quickly fix tests that were causing my builds to fail. Well, if you didn't know, no, really. At first glance, one of the first things I thought when I read that those recordings and videos would help me really find root cause analysis of tests that were flaky during CI, but ran just fine locally. I don't know. I really assumed that with those artifacts, I'd be able to cut down on the time needed to debug flaky tests or tests that are just failing constantly. So I'll ask you guys today, crap again, but how do you debug your CI errors? No, for real. How do you debug those errors? Before the release of Cypress Dashboard, or now Cypress Cloud, there were no great ways of looking at errors. At my previous employer, we used Azure DevOps, and we could access the artifacts saved during the CI process. But for someone who doesn't generally get into that Azure dashboard, it was a little tedious. You were left with just 3 options that you could really use to look at those tests. You could attempt to fix the test, just go right into the code, fix the test itself. The code may have had a value change that isn't reflected in the test. Someone YOLO'd a code change without updating the test before pushing to a merge request. Or you could just go right into the code and fix the code. The code is just buggy. The test is failing intermittently. Usually, this is due to state, maybe data isn't being properly fixtured, or if you're calling the backend directly, maybe there's something you can do to guardrail those network speeds for like your local environment versus the test environment. Or you could just rerun the test. Everyone's favorite fix of all. Just bump up the number of retries from 2 to 3 in your Cypress config, and then YOLO. Rerunning the test locally probably just passed, right? It was already passing when you pushed the code up initially, so why would it be failing after? So, again, I'm going to ask the audience, how do you debug the CI errors? Fixing is one thing, but actually finding the root cause is another thing entirely. It's a talent to be able to go into the test file and just spot the issue and then fix it immediately, especially on those extremely hard, complex cases. So again, before Cypress Cloud, you would have to rerun the branch locally. You'd add a couple of site.logs to print values of whatever the value is previously. Let's say I have some type of property that I want to test. I would see if those tests were what I expected before and after the network change. And then I'd re-push the code. And then I'd throw up another Hail Mary. But as of this year, you do not have to do that anymore because now we have test replay. So, what is it and why do we need it? Test Replay is a tool within Cypress Cloud that allows users to more accurately and efficiently debug tests run during the CI process. It takes what we knew and loved with screenshots and videos and amplified them with the ability to allow tracing, scrubbing, and other tools to help cut down on time usually spent setting up your local environment to duplicate the CI environment. Now you never have to leave your cloud to debug your issue. You can just do it all in one spot. If you and your organization notice that you're spending way too much time, and by the way, only you can know or be a judge of whether or not too much time is too much time, then Test Replay is going to solve this issue for you. So when it comes to other benefits, tying into that time save thing there, first you get an interactive artifact that you can use to rewind, fast forward, pause, and control time with. With that, you are able to interact with dev tools, namely the browser's network and console tab, so that you can see network responses and console errors when they arise, and exactly when the view and state look like when they appear in the browser. Finally, you can see your Cypress tools in a CI environment. I get the full ability to see states before my commands and after. Issues like the detached from DOM issue that would only occur during CI could easily be spotted and debugged from the cloud instead of spending several hours trying to replicate the issue. So let's take a look. Hopefully my screen isn't too big. I think I kind of fiddled with it a little bit. Well, we'll see in a second. So let's start by looking at Test Replay UI at a glance, starting with a component test. We'll start out by looking at an early stage of an event form for my event registration application. This test was working just fine locally, but as soon as I push the code up, it breaks. I've had friends tell me that when they open this puppy up, there's a lot on the screen. And sure, it can be a little daunting, but one thing I really like about this UI is that it is pretty compact. I can see some of the metadata up top immediately. I know which build number this belongs to. I can see who made the change. If I mouse over here, yep, there you go. And which branch it ran against. So here it's running against main. I can also see the file the test belongs to and also which browser the test ran on. The main section in the center gives you all the details you would normally see when running Cypress on your local machine. So when I run this test, you can kind of see like the exact state of how it comes on. I have access to the full test definition over here on the left. And I have full access to the usual time traveling. So I can go here, and I can exactly see what certain things look like if I were to type before and after, if this test was working. And then the last thing is they added a cool feature down at the bottom, the scrubber. And the scrubber is color coordinated to show what has ran in blue. So and the blue steps on the far left of the scrubber at the bottom is are things that have ran at this point. Things in gray are things that have not ran yet, and things in red are things that have not ran or ran but will error or has errored. This makes the already awesome and powerful time traveling even more powerful than it ever has before because now I can step directly to a spot where I believe the code errors and begin investigating from that spot forward. So if I get to this part, you can actually see where the test begins to fail. I can step right into where the error is, or I can go right before, and the bar will go to this spot. So right before I type, right before the test errors, I attempt to type something. And then I get an error of cannot read properties of undefined reading controls. Finally, we have access to the dev tools all in one centralized area over here on the right, network and console. Um, so that I can, or in one centralized area so that I don't have to pop up or pop open the native browser's dev tools anymore. It's all reflected here for me. I still have the ability to filter based on severity level. So if I don't want to see warnings or just the info, and I just want to key down on errors, I can still do that and only see the errors that I want to debug. And here you can see that the error that I have is Google is not defined. And it's also probably important that if I click on this, it'll take me right to where that error happens. It happens at the very beginning of the test before the test actually ran. So before we even get the compilate, or before we even get our code on the view, I'm already getting an error, which is probably why my test is failing. You can also see it stated here, and it'll also populate here. Everything is very tightly woven together. Spoilers, if you ever come across this error in the future, it is because I don't have my Google script in my Cypress HTML component file. So once you add that, this error does go away. The reason it was working just fine on my local is because I do have it in my script in my index.html file. So at this point, at a very high level, you should be able to make your way around the test replay UI sans the navigation tab, because this is a component test and I write my components to be my component test to be pretty pure. I don't have any network requests going on. So if we go to a different test, and we can actually before we do that, let's go back really fast. You can kind of see how you get to the network or to the test replay. If you go into the cloud, and this is a free account, by the way, if you go into the cloud, it'll be either here, or if you open up a different test, you can see that test replay shows up next to the watch video in the screenshot section. So it's pretty easy to spot out. It's a pretty big button. We go to a different one. This is going to be an actual login page. It does require a full test. That's going to make a network request. So you can see here that I'm actually getting things in my network. There are 200s, there are 304s. One thing I didn't talk about in the console tab too is that these will show you metadata as well for each individual section. So you can see when the request starts, how long the request takes, and the request type. If I wanted to get rid of all of my non-XHR or fetch requests, I can do that still, and actually click on these things to get more information out of it. So in here, I can see what the headers look like and what the query parameters are. In this test, it also fails. Let's play this one. I'm testing that I should be able to log in successfully with with a password or with an email and a password, and click the login button. In this case, I'm not getting a password field. We can see that I've successfully put in the email. I don't have a password field or placed yet, so I can look at my test and see exactly what's going on here. In this case, I have a email required field on my password field. More than likely, it's just an issue with that. If I go back and change this test to say password required, more than likely I'd be able to pass this test. So we can go back and play this. If this test were flaky, Brian talked about this earlier, if there are multiple attempts ran on my test, I would be able to see exactly which tests are passing and which tests are failing. In this case, this is just an error test. The test is just bad. It will never be flaky because there's 3 failed attempts. I could increase this 5 times, but it would never pass because I have an email required field here that I'm looking for instead of a password required field. But if there were a flaky test here, I could go and analyze the difference in between attempt 1 and attempt 2 if attempt 2 were the one that passed. And I could see what states are different here. I could go through and see if I was actually stubbing out network requests, if I was getting the data back correctly from the backend request, or if I was actually stubbing something out or not stubbing something out that I should be stubbing. Another cool feature on the opposite side of this is the speed shifter. So it can actually control time or control the pace at which my tests run. At 1x, we get the normal speed. You don't have to put in an extra line of code now to tempo out your test. If I wanted to show it at a quarter speed, I can totally do that. That way I can analyze things a little more at human pace. So in this case, I'm just showing it at 0.25. If I don't have anything else to do, I can sit here and watch this entire test run very slowly. If we want to go back and look at another one where we successfully log in, we can see that there are no errors. And these tests will do the exact same thing. All right. So with that, I hope that was worth the 20 minutes here that I potentially kept you from eating. I had a blast either way. So if you leave here today learning at least one thing, I hope it's this. If you aren't using Cypress Cloud in your day-to-day, you absolutely should be. If you already have Cypress Cloud in your org and you aren't using Cypress Cloud to increase your productivity, you absolutely should be. Remember, there are only 2 types of people in the world: Cypress Cloud users and bad testers. Don't be bad, be kind. Rewind. Thanks for your time.